So this kicks off the event. This event kicks off National Catholic Sisters Week. So thank you. Yes. So it's a series of events that we're having here at Elms College. We have St. Joseph's Day Mass and luncheon on Tuesday, and then Thursday we have 3 sisters coming to talk about our social justice activities within the congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And that will be, it's a sign up because that is lunch with a French flair. So you'll want to sign up. And it's an on-campus event for students only, so first come, first serve. It's a limited seating. And we'd like you to have this. So our Justice and Peace, our Seed, and our Labyrinth people are coming to tell you about the activities that we do in the congregation in the name of social justice. I just want to also, they'll not be happy I'm doing this, but I want to invite our President and Vice President to some stand of the congregation. We have Sister Joan and Sister Angela with us. And I just wanted to say, so we have Sister Deirdre, we have Sister Ellie, who most of you all know, we have Sister Melinda and myself. We all live together in the same house, and it still stands today. So, and as many of you know, it's just right down the street. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the students.
Now I would like to introduce to you our speaker for tonight. Sister Melinda was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. She attended Holy Family School in Springfield, Massachusetts, where she was taught by Sisters of St. Joseph. Her education was excellent, yet challenging. From the time she started first grade in Sister Richard Agnes's class, she knew she wanted to be a teacher, and a teacher she became. Sister Melinda taught in the state of Louisiana for several years and in Springfield Public Schools for many years. She was recognized as Teacher of the Year for Massachusetts. Her energy and enthusiasm for teaching was felt by her students. Her dedication to affect children's lives was recognized and honored. Being a teacher is a blessed way to encounter and assist in making students' lives better. Sister Melinda has been that blessing to many. Currently, Sister Melinda is part of a parish team at Holy Family Parish in Springfield, where she teaches, preaches, visits the sick, and homebound. Please join me in welcoming Sister Melinda.
Thank you very much. It really is an honor to be asked to come to speak to you today. And it's Holy Name Parish is a parish that I'm the pastoral minister of. So usually when I begin to talk about teaching, this is what I usually say. Teaching is like a piece of kente cloth. I used to begin all my presentations to teachers with this statement. The vibrancy of the cloth, the woven pieces of colorful strands and threads in the fabric, those strands woven together make the cloth whole. It brings the cloth to life. Teaching, for me, has always been that woven cloth, strands of light, coming together of woven strands of gifts and grace, coming together in relationship. The transformation of the cloth often reminds me of my life, my teaching experiences, my transformation, and the transformation of my students. My light, their light, our light shines, neighbor to neighbor, heart to heart, the sacred gifts, a kente cloth celebrating each life and each light, each strand touched by each other. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I thought I would begin, thank you, I thought I would begin each section of this, and it's going to be about 3 hours, so I hope you're ready. So the first section I call Transformation Begins at Age 7. I saw my first SSJ sister, Sister Richard Agnes, and that habit got me. And I thought in my 6th or 7th, at age 6 or 7, I thought I want to wear that, and I could be just like she was. So I started Holy Family in 1964. Holy Family was in Springfield on King Street and Eastern Avenue. And Sister Richard Agnes was tough, no nonsense. And one day that I'm always going to remember is the day of our first reading class. There was a small red chair in the middle of the book. And I still remember that chair and the fear and the tears that I refused to let Sister Richard Agnes see. I never opened my mouth as she kept yelling at me, read, read, read. I was 7, but I didn't know how to read. But I learned from that moment that if I was ever going to be a teacher, I would never embarrass or make a child feel bad about themselves. But that's not all Sister Richard Agnes taught me. There were moments in the first grade that I remember that she would get up and teach a story. And the story, there was always a cliffhanger that you had to wait for the next day. So I learned how to read. I learned how to read that book. But I learned that I really wanted to teach. And if I taught, I would embrace teaching in the ways that I saw that she didn't do that I wanted to do. I also remember in the 6th grade I had a teacher, Sister Sheila Elizabeth, and I am telling you now, I was the champion, the world champion of, it was a game that she used to play, History Around the World. And so you would stand at a desk, we had bolted down wooden desks, and she would throw out a question and you had to answer. So you'd stand next to the person that was sitting down. And every time you answered, you got to move on. And I beat everybody. Because I loved history. I can remember my first history lesson in the 4th grade at Holy Family. And that's a feat for me because there's a lot of things I don't remember at age almost 61. But I remember it was the Eric the Red and the Vikings. Leif Erikson and Eric the Red, and I loved those stories. I was drawn in to the way that she taught history. And in 4th grade, I said to myself, I know that that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a history teacher. And that never left me. So fast forwarding to my next theme is technique. Always use gentle construction and discipline. When I was 14 years old, I was a camp counselor for the first time. And I was assigned 7-year-olds. And I just thought I was over the moon. They were so cute, they were so nice, but cute only lasted for about a week. They never listened to me, I would scream and yell, they would never get in line. And so the camp where I was employed by, the Girls Club Family Center, they saw that I needed a great deal of help. And so a very seasoned elementary teacher came in and she worked with me. I then became the assistant and she was the camp counselor. And I learned from her that you can be disciplined and you can be very gentle and you can be kind. You can really have fun with students, but in a very disciplined and very kind way. So I learned really unique lessons from this person. I also remember I was struck at age 14. We had one little girl, I'll never forget her name. I've seen her as an adult several years ago. Her name was Janine. And the lessons I learned about being with children was pay attention to a child. Just pay attention. And this little girl would always send me letters and just write these cute, and I kept all of them in a little box. So, you know, the letters just sounded in her little girl self very desperate. And I can remember the day, she never wanted to change into her bathing suit. She'd always want to go alone to do that. The other girls would change and then go into the pool. And Janine, she was having trouble with her top, and she really didn't want me to help me. And then she let me do it. And I lifted up that little girl's top, and there were just belt marks all over her back, all over. The abuse, the marks on her belt. So the lesson I learned from that is just to pay attention to children, and we became very close. You know, I don't remember in the 70s what the reporting process was, but I remember going to the director, and you know, they looked into the situation at home. But I was struck by all of those incidences to take care of children, okay, when you're teaching and when you're with them. So my next theme is from elementary to secondary education, bulletin boards, and Richard Tubbs. So in the olden days, when I graduated from high school in 1976, I went to a small Catholic college called Amherst College in Woodstock, Connecticut. And I'm telling you, I was so certain I was going to be an elementary teacher. I remember the little kids, I remember Janine, and I just wanted to do that until the first day of orientation, and Sister got up to talk about the elementary program and the secondary education program. In the elementary program, you had to do thematic bulletin boards. They had to, before they graduated from college, they had to produce a children's book. And when she finished explaining the elementary ed program, I raised my hand before she talked about secondary ed. She said, "Do you have a question?" I said, "Yeah, where's the registrar's office?" Because I'm like switching out of elementary ed. And so secondary ed was really cool because you only had to do one bulletin board, and I stuck by that. The whole time my student taught that I only did one bulletin board. I still remember what it was. It was the United Nations. So there was one bulletin board in this 11th grade class. I cut out a picture of the United Nations, I plastered it on the bulletin board, and I put and in large letters, U.N. And when my practice teacher came in and she saw the bulletin board, she said, "Miss Pellerin, couldn't you have at least put all of the letters?" Well, this is in the olden days when you had to cut all your letters. There was no such thing as, now you punch and you get them in at the store, and we couldn't do that. You had to, cut that. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm a secondary education teacher, and I just can't do that. So I taught, if I remember, it was 6th and 7th grade geography, and then 11th grade American history. So when I started student teaching, so I went to college in 1976, I student taught in 1979. I started on Halloween at Killingly High School in Killingly, Connecticut. So that was wild. So when I walked in, the first person that we were going to talk to was the principal. So we walked in, he was impressive. We walked in and he talked about his years in education and how much he loved the children and education and how he supported the programs here and how long he had been a principal. And then we were whisked off to our programs. My friend was she was a business teacher, and I was in history. So the minute I met the teacher that I was going to work with, her first name was Elizabeth, she said, whatever he told you in his office, he doesn't do any of those things. He literally locks himself in the office all day. He doesn't even know what's going on in his school. So when I got to Killingly, I thought, they're country bumpkins. This is Killingly, Connecticut. I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm from a city, an inner city. I'm the only black teacher they have ever seen. They are going to be so in awe with me that it's just going to be a piece of cake. So, you know, I was wrong about that. In fact, when I look back to over 20 years of teaching experience, that was the most challenging group of students that I ever had. So I want to tell you like a little funny story before I get into Richard Tubbs. If you are in education, you know that the professor that's in charge of the program often comes to observe your teaching. So if you're not in education, I'm telling you, they come to observe your teaching. And the professor I had, I don't think she had been in education for more than 5 years, because the only thing I remember her teaching us was how to erase a blackboard without turning your back. So you know I'm aged because I'm talking about blackboards with chalk and erasers, because we didn't have smart boards and all the stuff we have today. And so I'll just demonstrate. This is how she showed us on our first day of education class. On the side, and I'm like, is that all? I know more. I work with 7-year-olds. I know everything. And so she would come periodically to observe me. And you know, one of the first times she came, she said, okay, you know what, that bulletin board, you gotta change it up a little bit. You could have, that's what she said, you could have at least cut out all the letters for the United Nations. I had students, they were characters. So I'm teaching the lesson, I don't even remember what the lesson was. She's in the back and she's writing. And all of a sudden, they're raising their hands and asking questions. Even when I'm not asking them to raise their hand, you know, Miss Pellerin, can you tell us again about that lesson when you talked about the Egyptians? That was so interesting. And I'm like looking at the child going, what are you doing? So another child would get up and say, oh my God, that was so interesting what you just told. And then I was telling the class, please stop it. Please stop doing it. And they wouldn't. So the 45 minutes painfully went on. And as they were leaving the class, and she's standing next to me, and I'm trying to apologize to her. I did not tell these students to do it. She said, Melinda, I know. They're leaving the class and talking to each other. Wasn't that just wonderful? Didn't Miss Pellerin do a good job? She deserves an A. No, I think she deserves an A. I said, get out of here. You're going to get me in so much trouble. And so I had one student, I will never forget Richard Tubbs. He was in the 11th grade, and the group, they could be very rowdy for 11th graders that weren't too interested in U.S. history or current events. And he would often do this. In the olden days with the chalkboard, I would I put on the notes on the board, and then we had to go out in the hallway when the bell rang for the students to get from one class to the other. I'd walk back in, and what would he would have erased everything that I put on the board. And I mean, he was just a horror show. He just caused problems. They were nice kids. They weren't malicious. But you know, I turned my back and he'd be throwing stuff. I turned my back and he'd be in another seat. So he did some phenomenal things. I mean, he did something every single day. I was the most popular student at Elms College at dinner time because I was always telling stories about the feats of Richard Tubbs. And people would I'm serious, they would gather around my table at dinner and say, so what did he do to you today? And I would tell a story. So he could be bad news. One day I was teaching, and I had my back to the class, and I was writing something on the board, and I'm writing, and all of a sudden I smell smoke. And I didn't even have to turn around. I knew what it was. I knew it was Richard Tubbs. So I turned, and he is, now that whatever he had done to the shade was on flames, and now the shade was, and he's trying to nervously put it out. And the class is like horrified, and they're looking at me, and I'm like, I'm so fed up with this kid. So I had a big glass or something on my desk. I just quietly went out into the hallway, filled it with, and doused the flame. Then I got on the phone and I called That's the first and only time I saw the principal. They came running into my classroom, and the two vice principals came. They grabbed Richard Tubbs and dragged him out. And as he was leaving, he was so, he said, I only did it as a protest against Iran taking over the American embassy. So he was gone for 2 weeks, and it was a blessing. And then he came back and sort of started, you know, this stuff all over again. And this is the point to teaching and that transformation for me and that connection. I often went to the library to correct papers in between classes, and I'm diligently doing that. I guess I was diligently correcting papers. And I look up, and it's Richard Tubbs coming toward me. And I'm going, that son of a, and I'm not going to say the words that I was thinking in my head, and he saw it coming up to me, and he's smiling, he sits down, he goes, you know, Miss Pellerin? And I said, what, Richard? We have voted that you're one of the best student teachers that we've had. And we really appreciate what you do in class. I said, really? Because you don't stay in class long enough to appreciate anything, and you cause all my... And he said, well, you know what, Miss Pellerin, I'm really a nice guy. I'm really good. I went, really? Because I never see that. I never see that. And he said, well, you know, I have to keep up my reputation because, you know, like they know me at Killingly High School. They know what kind of a guy I am. I said, you know, I just wish you would do a little less of that in my classroom so I could teach a little more. And so we kept talking. Never judge a book by its cover. So as we were talking, he said, you know, I'm really very intelligent. I'm very bright. And I said, oh, really? Because I rarely see it. But he said, and I said, so what are you really interested in? And he said, I'm interested in the stars, astrology. I really study the stars. And then he's telling me all about the stars and the solar system. And I was transfixed by this young man. And so I said to him, let's make a deal. If you are just a little bit nicer to me in class and let me teach a little bit more, I'll be your student and you can be my teacher at lunchtime. Just come up and so we spent several weeks. Richard would come up, not go to lunch, he would come up, we'd sit down together, and he taught me all about the stars. So don't judge a book by its cover. And I learned later that Richard came from a very dysfunctional family and often slept in barns at night because of the abuse that was going on at home. And so, I went from Halloween to Christmas. And the other thing is, and I don't know if you're education majors, the teacher that you're working with in the school is probably supposed to stay with you at some point. The very first day, on Halloween, when I got to the class, she introduced me, and then she said, okay, I'm going. I never saw her again until the end of my student teaching, when she took all my lessons and we got together and we talked about it. So I was really on my own from the beginning. So I think I have a little bit of time to tell you one more story. I flunked the captain of the football team while I was there. Guy, I'll never forget this name, Guy Davis. He cheated on a test that I had given. And it was the homecoming game, and he could not play, and the coach came to me. When I think about it today, I was just this little student teacher, and they came in my room, the coach and the assistant coach, like, you will have to change that. And I sat at my desk, I will not change it. He cheated. And so they backed down, and he didn't play, and they lost the game that day, the pivotal game that day. So they weren't that happy with me. They got over it. So on Christmas break, I ended my student teaching, and the kids gave me gifts and everything. And while they were doing it, this 11th grade class, Richard Tubbs wasn't there because he got suspended again, but it wasn't because of me. It was in another class. So the students kept asking the teacher that I was working with and the vice principal, could you leave because we want to talk to to Miss Pellerin in private and give her our gift. And I'm going like, oh my God, don't you guys leave, because I don't know what these students are going to do. So they left, and the students said, we didn't want them in here because Richard Tubbs is outside. So my classroom was next to a courtyard. He was hiding in the bushes. I opened the window, and he crawled through the bushes, and he just said, thank you. And, I really appreciate everything you did. So, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. Because it's not about my transformation. It was really about those students and how they changed my life. I started teaching in inner city Springfield. And so I call this section Mock Trials, Pizza, Late Nights at Home, Practicing on Saturdays, in Attorney Beaudry's office, and team teaching. So when I got to Commerce the first time, High School of Commerce is in Springfield, they had a course that no one in the history department wanted to teach. No one would go near this course with a 10-foot pole because they all said, oh, you got to be a lawyer to teach it. It was called law-related ed. Well, I was the newest person on the staff in the history department, so guess who got it? I got the course. I didn't know what to do, but I had this idea. I had a friend who was a lawyer in downtown Springfield. If you know where Commerce is, it's right on State Street, very close to downtown Springfield. So my law-related ed, I team taught with this lawyer. So we would do case studies. I would teach part of it, and then sometimes the class and I would walk down to his office, and he and I would teach together. It was relevant, it was fun, and they learned a great deal. And then a year after my second year there was this competition that came out. It was called the Massachusetts Bar Association Mock Trial Tournaments. And so, because I didn't know anything, and I was very young and excited, I said, I think my students can do that. And so, I went to a general meeting, and there were teachers from Chicopee, from Agawam, from Longmeadow, and then there was me. When I came through the door, the people from Chicopee and Longmeadow said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to apply so that my students can be part of the mock trial competition. Well, you understand, because Commerce was known as a business school and not college prep. They had college prep courses, but it was mostly business. Well, you're just a business school. How do you ever expect that your students will ever be part of a mock trial? And in fact, I found out from a math teacher who lived in Chicopee, who was on the Chicopee Council. She said, Melinda, you guys better do a competition, because last night when I was at the city council meeting, Commerce was the butt of every joke. Like, how does Commerce think they're going to do in a mock trial competition? So it's a great deal of training that goes through. So Mr. Beaudry and I worked with the students learning opening statements, closing arguments, what cross-examination means, direct examination. They put on the characters of lawyers and witnesses and expert witnesses in the trial. The first year, we beat every school in this area. And when you win, there are sections. So you have a local section, and then we went up to Northampton. We beat everybody in Northampton. We went to Worcester. We got to Worcester, and we lost by 1 point the first year. The second year, we did it again. We went all the way to the state capitol for the final mock trial competition. So there were hundreds of schools from across Massachusetts that were part of the mock trial program, and so we were the last two. The two schools that it was Newton High School and the high school the school that everybody thought, oh, come on, you're a business school, it's inner city. I can remember that my students, we had to go out and buy them suits. They didn't have suits, they didn't have ties, they didn't have the appropriate shirt. I'd go to Goodwill, get their clothes, get them dry cleaned. Lawyers in the city would pay for shoes and ties, show the guys how to tie and do those things. We're competing against a school, Newton, They have Brook Brothers suits and designer everything. And you know, my students are up there. We lost by 1 point. Our expert witness, he just fell apart. Jose, just on cross-examination, he lost it. He was very nervous. But it was, you know, it was a great achievement, not for me, but for those students to see that their life wasn't just about Springfield, Massachusetts, that there was a whole wide world outside of Springfield. One of my students went on to become a medical doctor, another student is a lawyer, a couple of them went into career military. That's not, it's because of something that they had in themselves. But I would like to think that I was part of that strand and that woven cloth. So that's why I call that mock trials pizza late night, because I would bring them at home at night. And one of the things that you know, when you're bringing these students home, you never, don't judge a book by its cover. I began to see the poverty that a lot of these students came from. The student that didn't want me to, don't drop me off in front of my house. Miss Pellerin, you don't need to do that. Drop me off at the corner. No, really, it's all right. And then, you know, I did that for Jeff Herbley. I dropped him off at the corner. And then I went around just to make sure he got in. And, you know, he lived in a, you know, abandoned building. You know, his family was living there so you never know how you're going to touch the life of someone else. And I think that that's the greatest sacred grace of teaching, touching someone else's life, and those students touching mine. The next section, I have 6th graders take on the city council. This was the most fun that I had in teaching. By this time I was at Duggan Middle School, and we had a mock trial team, and I had joined an organization called the Pioneer Valley Project, which was a social activist organization. In that year, Pioneer Valley Project was fighting for libraries to be open in the neighborhoods where the children really needed them open. They didn't have computers at home. They needed to utilize the libraries, and there were massive budget cuts. And so I decided, because of what I thought education should be, it should be exciting. It should be relevant. History can be that way. It's not boring. It is exciting. And so I decided as a civics lesson, my students would be involved with the Pioneer Valley Project. So they learned what a sit-in was like, and then we actually had a sit-in at one of the libraries that was closed. They learned that, you know, people don't always think you're cute as 6th graders. And so I remember going to a library meeting, a board meeting, and they knew in advance that my students were coming, and they barred the students from the meeting. The city council probably made the biggest mistake of their life. When the Pioneer Valley Project was protesting, you know, where the funding was going and why it wasn't going to libraries, so we brought the students, and my students were really well prepared to speak, but the city council didn't know that. And so when the adults and the students came in, one of the city councilors said, I don't want to hear from the adults. You, the student right there, you come up here. And I remember her name was Lauren Delise Rodriguez. She was about this tall. She didn't even the step of the microphone, she had a tippy toe to talk into the microphone. And she started talking about stats and where the money was going and why it wasn't funded in there. And that city councilor started sweating, because he then knew that this 6th grader knew a lot about the budget in Springfield. So they tried to ask her questions and tried to trip her up, and that was not happening. And so another student of mine, Philip Gideon, got up and told the city council about themselves and about where the money should go, and that these inner city students are not to be taken lightly, because we're going to be voters one day. I can tell you, Philip Gideon is now PhD in mathematics and in educational administration. He teaches in California right now. And when he was in college, when he graduated at the top in his class. one of the things that he talked about was his experience with PvP. So he's still doing that kind of work in inner city Los Angeles right now. And so the students that I worked with in the mock trial and with the city council and PvP, really, you know, I don't know how much of a difference I made. I hope I made some, but they really transformed my life as a human being and as a teacher. The students that I talked about, the places that I've been, I also, at the High School of Commerce in 1979, French teacher and I wrote a proposal. There was a big grant that was going out. The superintendent at the time was, now I can't remember his name, Negroni. And he had come from New York and he had brought in all these businesses. And one of the businesses that were they really liked what the superintendent was talking about was the MITRE Corporation. MITRE used to be in Lexington and Concord, Mass. I'm not sure if they're there, and they're a big technology institute. So they presented the teachers in the city of Springfield with a proposal. If you come up with a strategic plan to use technology, the technology of 1970-something, technology, it's a comprehensive plan, we will fund it. So Danny Battisti and I got together. He's a French teacher, and I was teaching African American history. And Danny was corresponding with an all-girls school in the Ivory Coast. And he said, Melinda, we should write a proposal integrating history and French, working with this all-girls school. So we talked to the African teacher in the Ivory Coast, and Danny and I wrote a proposal. We were the winning proposal. We won. So what did that mean? They took out all the bolted down wooden desks in our classrooms and they put in sophisticated technology, early whiteboards, internet access, so that we could communicate with this all-girls school in the Ivory Coast. And so because we won this major grant, we became like mini celebrities. But I can tell you, this is the most exciting part of the grant. We had telephones in our rooms. Oh my God. And so they installed the telephones on a Friday. So when we got home, Danny called me on the phone and he said, let's call our classrooms to see here at the phone. So that's what we did. That was it wasn't the most exciting, but that's what I remember. We had telephones and we had internet access. So we developed a program where his students would send letters. They were practicing their French, so they would send letters in French. And my students made a video of what a typical American student is like in Springfield, Massachusetts. So I gave them a video cam, because we got one of those from the MITRE Corporation, and I said to the kids, they were assigned the cam, take it home, take pictures of your room. So, you know, when I looked at some of the video, I said, okay, the next time you take a picture of your room, clean the room up a little bit before we send this to Africa. And, you know, they take pictures of them on the bus. Let's delete the pictures of you on the bus that you're trying to send. And so we sent our information, and the all-girls school in French sent their information. So Danny's French students translated it from French into English for my students. So it was a cool way to an integrated program. And then the African teacher came to visit us in the United States. We picked him up downtown at the rail station, and the minute he got off, he said, this is the one thing I want to do. I want to know what this pizza is. Because all of your students keep writing about, can we have pizza for dinner? So Danny lived in classical condominiums. He said, yeah, we'll get pizza. He almost had a heart attack because he said, oh my God, you just go to the phone and you order the pizza pizza, and a man brings you pizza. They come and bring it to you. I said, yeah, if you have the money and you live in the right neighborhood, they will bring the pizza. He almost had a stroke when we went to Costco's, because Danny had to get a couple of things, the abundance of Costco's, and I kept saying, you're really becoming a little embarrassing. You're getting really too excited about the bottled water and all the food, and look at all of this, look at it. And so, but it was a great experience. So he talked to our students, and then Danny and I had an opportunity to go to the Ivory Coast. And so we went and I taught a law-related ed class to the students. One funny story before I wrap it up. So Danny speaks French in Ivory Coast. The language is English along with African dialects, and I speak only English. Well, I try to speak English. So he constantly had to translate for me. So I went to an English classroom to teach law-related ed, and the teacher said, Miss Pellerin from the High School of Commerce, and then I opened my mouth to start to speak, and 45 students are laughing hysterically. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what I did. It was an English class. I was supposed to speak English. I don't know any French. And so the instructor said, no, it's just that they've never heard an English accent from the United States. They're used to, the Queen's English, the British accent. So I was saying, oh, if you think this is Western Mass, let me try to do Eastern Mass. Pop the cod hard, they lost it. And I said, in the United States, and I did a Southern accent. There are many dialects. That was a transformation in my teaching experience, because I saw how little they had and how they were so enthusiastic about going to class. One of the students asked through translation, so in your classrooms, is it like this? Well, when adults walked into the classroom, everybody has to stand, and you don't sit down until the instructor says, you may be seated. I said, okay, that's never going to happen in the United States, anywhere at any school. So we just talked about all of our experiences. The next section I put Senator Kennedy and his fiancée. One part of the MITRE grant was we got to speak all over the country about technology in inner city. And one day, Senator Kennedy got a hold of our grant and decided he wanted to come and visit us. So he and Vicki, his wife, was his, they had just gotten engaged. So Danny and I actually got to teach a lesson to the senator, and all the time, like sweating, and I'm going, I hope this man does not ask me a thing. And he did it. The only thing he asked me was, and your name is? And I couldn't remember what my name is. I looked like a doofus. I went, and Danny hit me, and he said, her name is Melinda Pellerin. And then as he's leaving, we were going to go be in the car with him, I yelled out, it's Melinda Pellerin. It was so stupid. So he was really interested in how Congress could fund more money for inner city schools and technology, and he wanted to look at our 2 classrooms as a model for that. So he really listened. He was really gracious, and when we were in the car alone with us, he told a lot of jokes. He said, I'm engaged to Vicki, and she has 2 small children, and he's telling Danny and I, the funniest thing is Halloween, I went out trick-or-treating with the kids, and I went up to someone's house with the 2 little kids, and the man opened the door, and he goes, oh my God, honey, there's a man out here who has a mask just like Ted Kennedy's friend. And I said, what did you do? And he goes, I just went with it, played it off. So we had an opportunity, superintendents from all over the country came to our classrooms and asked us questions, and we were, but it was great. It was great for my students to see how interested people from all over the country were. One of the last things that happened is Danny and our names were mentioned on the floor of Congress in the Senate. Melinda Pellerin and Danny Battisti, and they're phenomenal
program was mentioned on the Senate. We did get a little bit of funding, but not everything we wanted. So, you know, when I began this, I said that teaching is like kente cloth. Each strand is brightly colored. Each strand makes a cloth and brings it to life. And that's what I have always felt teaching was to me. I was asked to write a story about my teaching because in 2016 I was Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. That award afforded me an opportunity to go across Massachusetts and just talk about commerce in Springfield and inner city. I also met George Bush Jr. in the White House, got to shake his hand, only talked to him for 2 minutes. Nice guy. Short. It was a phenomenal experience. And the little student that spoke before the student council, I brought her to the White House with me. So I brought my mother, and she mesmerized the Secret Service. I'm going to be the first Hispanic President of the United States. You know that? I'm going to be and she went on and talked about her mock trial experiences. So I also got to author a chapter in a book by Sonia Nieto, who was a professor at UMass, called Why We Teach. And in chapter 4 of the book, I highlight what I learned from the Sisters of St. Joseph, my experiences at Holy Family, and how those experiences made me, or helped to make me the teacher that I am today. And so I use the strands of the kente cloth. So, you're sick of hearing from me. I just want to read one more thing to you. One of my fellow sisters, Sister Jean Branshaw, who is a phenomenal teacher. She teaches at St. John's Baptist School. So she sent me an email a few weeks ago. She goes, "You got to help me. You just have to help me. I'm trying to teach these students about the civil rights movement, and Melinda, they don't believe me. They don't think that bus boycott and all that stuff ever happened. Could you come in and talk to my 5th graders?" And I said, "Sure, Jean, I will." So I went in and I did this whole lesson on Rosa Parks. So I took the chairs and I made a makeshift bus. I got one student, had him sit down. "You're the bus driver." And I talked about, you know, at the time, the bus drivers had, they had police power to kick people off the bus, and I went through all of that. You never know how you touch someone's life. So I just want to read you something that Jean left at our house last week. "Dear Sister Melinda, thank you for taking the time out of your day to come to our class to share about your history and my history. When I first came to the school, it was weird for me, because in the school pictures that we take in front of the church, I stand out the most. Sometimes that can be good, but in my case, it's really uncomfortable. From the ages of 7 to 10, I played soccer. In all of the teams I played for, I was always the only African American on the team. So when you were talking about us, about Ruby Bridges, I thought, wow. Sometimes standing out can mean power or braveness. Eventually, I got less scared of caring what people think, and all your stories helped me to understand that even though I'm different on the outside, on the inside, I fit right in with everyone else. So thank you again for coming to teach my class about history and about Black history. Best regards, Deshia Lawrence." So I want to thank Deshia Lawrence because it was a learning experience for me. And that's why, for me, teaching is more than a profession. It's a vocation that I have always loved. Thank you.